When my father called me a disgrace, he didn't shout, he whispered it like a verdict. He was standing 3 feet away, holding the newspaper that ended my career. No anger, no confusion. Just quiet disgust, the kind that burns colder than hate. That was the night something inside me split. Not because I lost my job or my name, but because the man who taught me justice didn't care about truth anymore. He cared about how it looked. My name is Agnes Parker, and for 3 years I let him believe I was everything he said I was. Until the day we met again in court, and the judge who once read my classified reports took off his robe and called me captain. The sound of the gavel cracked through the courtroom sharp and final, like the last note of a song everyone pretends to know the lyrics to. But that morning, inside the Manhattan courthouse, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the start of something I'd been waiting 3 years to face. Across the aisle, my father sat with the posture of a man rehearsing righteousness. His lawyer, Harvey Quinn, strutted to the center of the floor, voice rising with theatrical confidence. Every word rolled off his tongue like he was performing for cameras that weren't even there. He kept using my last name as if it were his weapon. I let him. When he finally slammed his hand on the table and declared I had shamed our family, I didn't flinch. Instead, I straightened the pen on my desk, aligning it perfectly against the edge of the notepad. Small discipline in a room built on chaos. No one noticed. They never did. The judge, James Holt, watched in silence. His silver hair caught the light, and for a moment I wondered if he remembered me. His name had once appeared in a file stamped Sentinel, a file that cost me everything to protect. My father leaned forward, his tone cool and rehearsed. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about responsibility." The room held its breath. I met Holt's eyes, calm and steady. "Then I'll take mine, Your Honor," I said, for every truth they buried to protect their name. The air shifted. Holt tilted his head, curious. I could feel it then, the balance of power moving quietly toward me. I was raised in the Parker household where reputation wasn't just a virtue, it was religion. My father used to say, "A Parker never bends. We win or we disappear." To him, survival meant control. To me, it meant truth. That difference became the wound that would never close. While he built arguments that dazzled juries, I built cases that exposed them. I believed justice lived in evidence, not performance. That belief made me the family heretic. 3 years ago, I was deep inside the most sensitive investigation of my career, Davenport Industries, a defense contractor suspected of funneling black money to secure federal weapon contracts. We had enough to make history until the DOJ system went dark. Overnight, my database was copied, leaked, and weaponized against me. The next morning, my director called me in. His tone was sterile, practiced. I didn't hear my name. I heard a verdict. I was told I was under investigation for breaching confidentiality. I knew exactly who had done it, but naming him would expose Rahima, the Afghan woman who risked her life to give us evidence. If her name surfaced, she'd be dead within a day. So I stayed silent. They revoked my clearance, suspended me. The press branded me the mole inside the DOJ. My father didn't come. He didn't even call. Just one message. "You embarrassed us." That night, in a bare apartment that echoed every word I didn't say, I unlocked the metal box I'd kept hidden under my bed. Inside were the only things that still felt real: the Davenport files. One document bore a familiar signature, J.M. Holt. He had once served as liaison officer on the same task force. I hadn't seen that name in years. I closed the file and stared at my reflection in the window. The city lights flickered like static, distant and indifferent. Everything I'd ever defended, my career, my family's pride, the Parker name, was gone. All I had left was the truth, and it was waiting quietly inside that box. 2 months later, my mother died. Her absence hollowed out the house, but nothing else had changed. The dining room still gleamed like a courtroom, crystal glasses, aligned silver cutlery polished to perfection. My father sat at the head of the table, as if the trial never ended. His eyes, cold and sharp, moved across me like a blade. He didn't ask how I'd been. He just said, "Your mother's will divides the estate equally, but I won't let you destroy what she built." I held my voice steady. She built a home, Dad, not a monument. Elliot. My younger brother tried to mediate his fork suspended midair. Maybe tonight isn't the time. It's exactly the time my father snapped. He reached into his jacket and unfolded a newspaper. My face stared back at me under the headline, DOJ, Agent Fired for Leaking Data. He began reading the words aloud, disgraced, dismissed, dishonorable, like each syllable was a gavel strike. I tightened my grip around the glass of water, keeping my composure the only way I knew how. If I spoke, I would betray an oath. If I stayed silent, I'd let him bury my name. So I did what I'd been trained to do. I endured. Silence became my last defense. Sometimes that's the only form of resistance left. After dinner, I stood to leave. My mother met me at the door, her hand trembling against mine. "Don't let them turn your truth into their story," she whispered. 2 months later, she was gone. When the will was read, everything seemed fair, half to me, half to Elliot. Then the message came, Dad's contesting it. Says you're not fit to handle it. I laughed, not sure if it was from pain or the dark humor of inevitability. That night, I opened the metal box for the first time in 3 years. The Davenport files were still there, dust gathering on the edges. The signature J.M. Holt still visible in faded ink. That name struck me harder than any insult my father ever hurled. The judge presiding over the current case bore the same name. The same man who once signed my classified clearance now held my fate in his courtroom. And the man trying to destroy me might be the one who profited from the leak that ruined me. I placed the old newspaper on the table and traced my father's quote beneath the headline with my thumb. My reflection stared back from the glossy page, calm, certain. You called me a disgrace, Dad. Let's see how well that name survives in court. I read my father's summons until the ink blurred the names at the top, stark as a judge's hammer. Plaintiff Martin Parker, defendant Agnes Parker, cause unfit by reason of alleged professional misconduct, therefore disqualified from administering the estate. The irony sat on my tongue like grit. Ethics, the very tool he wielded in courtrooms, had become the blade he aimed at me. I did not call for a lawyer. I had spent a career breaking down the defenses of men who thought power would protect them. If I could unmake them, I could unmake this. Daniel picked up on the second ring voice, flat with disbelief. He always sounded better on the phone than in person. His curiosity never dulled. He's suing you. For the house, I said. That's not about property, he replied. Exactly, I said. It's about control. He never learned another language. When the line went quiet, I opened the metal box for the first time in months. The Davenport binders were there, patient and dry, the pages smelling faintly of old ink and dust. The report I had kept safe all those years carried a signature that made my chest tighten. J.M. Holt, the man behind the bench in the very courtroom that would hear this fight, was named in the file I'd been forbidden to show. Rahima was no longer under protection. Her relocation had been completed months ago. That fact shifted something like a lock in my head. What I could not say then, I could say now. What I had once sacrificed to keep hidden could finally be used as shield and sword. Fingers steady, I typed the motion that would change the tenor of the case. Respondent files motion to protect integrity of federal record. I cited Clause 12.9 of the DOJ Confidential Protection Rules, a narrow provision most attorneys never see the safeguard for investigators who paid with reputation to keep a witness alive. The clause had Holt's imprimatur on it years ago. Signing the document, my pulse felt like a measured drumbeat, not terror, but the focus of someone returning to a known fight. This was not a battlefield of rifles and flash. It was statute and precedence, a different kind of ordinance. I was walking back into a room I had never wanted to enter, but now I carried every piece of proof I needed. Court that morning filled faster than I expected. Cameras clustered, murmurs climbed, and the gallery smelled of nervous perfume and stale coffee. My father sat with a practiced poise, the sort of posture that reads as calm until you see the small tremor in the hand that checks his watch. Harvey Quinn opened with the familiar cadence of a man who builds narratives for a living. This is about legacy, he said. My client's daughter was discharged for conduct that endangered national interests. He painted a portrait meant to unsettle duty, betrayed trust, violated. I took notes precise and spare. I had been on the giving end of lines like that. Their performance value was high, their substance usually shallow. When Harvey withdrew a thin classified packet and began to read, my stomach registered the old metallic taste of adrenaline. That was my discharge file, the one sealed at the highest level. Holt's hand tightened on the bench. "Counselor, where did you obtain that file?" he asked in a tone that made the room lean forward. "It's public record," Harvey said. "Public," Holt repeated with incredulity. "That document is level 5 classified." "Are you sure you want to continue?" Silence fell like a gavel. For a heartbeat, I watched my father's eyes flicker confidence, wavering under the first true question. I rose, voice even. "Under DOJ, Clause 12.9. I request verification of the data origin," I said. The judge pinched the bridge of his nose. A vein twitched in his temple. I had landed the motion where it would hurt at the intersection of evidence and legality. Outside the courtroom later, my father stared at me in the hall with something sharp and animal in his gaze. "You think procedure will save you?" he asked. "It already did," I said. "You remain a stain on the family," he spat. Perhaps, I answered. But now the stain has provenance. That afternoon, Daniel's email landed like a bullet point on my screen. The IP trace of the file Harvey presented led back to a server tied to my father's former law practice and Davenport's network. The truth was no longer a rumor I carried alone. It had begun to point in a direction that made my father's empire tremble. 3 days later, the clerk's office delivered the judge's note, proceedings paused pending an origin of evidence inquiry. My father's jaw tightened. Harvey tried to steady the narrative, but when a lawyer runs out of words, facts begin to speak on their own. At my kitchen table in Arlington, I opened the metal box again. The Davenport binders sat exactly where I left them. Tucked on top was an old bank statement showing a suspicious transfer, $150,000, made to a shell called Parker Consulting Group. Cross-referencing that routing number sent a chill down my spine, the account tied back to my father's former firm. Daniel called voice-taut with the weight of the trace he'd run. The file Harvey used had been pulled from a Davenport server. My father's firm handled their settlements. This was not a greedy son fighting for a house. This was laundering influence, the currency behind clean reputations. I filed an amended counter-motion and attached the financials. My last line read like a promise: "The source of the disgrace shall be established under oath." In court, Holt arrived quieter than usual. Harvey launched into a high-performative objection about conspiracy. Holt interrupted, informing counsel that the firm was now subject to federal review for possession of classified material. The room went still. My father smiled thinly and warned he would take me down with him. I told him he already had 3 years ago. He simply failed to recognize what he'd created. I got to the courthouse before anyone else. Rain sketched the city in a gray hush, and I scribbled 2 words in my notebook. "Don't rush. Wait for him to destroy himself." Harvey pleaded dismissal, calling the case revenge theater. I rose and said, "Truth does not disappear because it is inconvenient." My father shouted that I had betrayed my oath. Holt fixed him with a look that cut through decades of practiced certainty. Then slowly, Holt crossed to the bench, laid a hand on the sealed packet, and declared the reason it had been sealed: the court had ordered the cover for a confidential witness under Operation Sentinel. The admission shifted the courtroom's gravity. Harvey went pale. My father slumped back as if winded. In the hallway, Elliot appeared, voice-breaking, telling me that we were the ones who had been wrong all along. Holt leaned close during recess and told me he could not testify for me, but he would let the record do the speaking. When he rapped the gavel, he invoked Federal Code Black. The case just moved into a different kind of danger, one that would not let reputations hide. That morning, the courthouse was overflowing. The corridors were a crush of reporters and camera flashes, feeding on the headline they'd been waiting for: "The disgraced DOJ agent faces her father in court again today." They didn't know that the person on trial wasn't me. My father sat motionless, dark suit pressed, sharp silver frames glinting beneath the lights. His lawyer, Harvey, looked broken eyes, sunken collar, damp voice cracking under the weight of his own performance. I folded my hands on the desk, breathing slowly like a soldier before the first shot. Harvey's opening sounded desperate, his words chasing each other into exhaustion. "Your Honor." This entire hearing has turned into a political circus. My client demands immediate dismissal. Holt's voice cut through like a blade. Mr. Quinn, the circus began when classified files entered this courtroom. The room froze. The shift in air was immediate heavy electric, a pause before thunder. Holt rose from the bench, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he reached for the buttons of his robe. One by one, he unfastened them, the fabric falling open, to reveal a white shirt beneath, and pinned over his heart, the silver insignia of Task Force Sentinel. The emblem caught the light slicing through the tension like glass. "Agent Parker," he said, his tone firm but steady. "It's been a long time." A wave of shock rippled through the gallery. Harvey stumbled back. Elliot's mouth fell open. My father's color drained. He whispered the word agent like a confession. Holt turned toward me. "You were removed under my cover order, Captain. You protected a witness at the cost of your career. This court corrects that record today." The clerk began to read from the DOJ letter, the words echoing like vindication carved into marble. "By Federal Code Black Subject, Agnes Parker, is hereby reinstated to honorable service with commendation for classified integrity under Operation Sentinel." 3 years of silence collapsed into one breath. I rose slowly, eyes on Holt. "Sir, I never stopped serving." He nodded once. "And you never will." My father trembled, mouth opening, but no words came. Holt's gaze shifted to him. "Mr. Parker, you tried to destroy her record. Instead, you revealed your own corruption." The silence that followed was absolute. The man who had called me a disgrace couldn't even meet my eyes. I looked forward, voice calm but final. "Reputation can be built on lies, Dad, but honor survives silence." Holt struck the gavel. Case dismissed. Federal review initiated. The sound echoed through the chamber, not an ending this time, but the sound of something being restored. My name, my honor, my life beginning again. The story broke before midnight. Every network carried it, but I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't need to watch what I already knew. Truth doesn't need a stage. The front page of the New York Chronicle the next morning read, "Former DOJ investigator vindicated in court. Father under federal review." The words looked clinical, detached, but they hit harder than any verdict. My father's name, once synonymous with integrity, now carried an asterisk. Daniel stopped by my office while I was boxing the last of my files. The room smelled of cardboard and cold coffee. He leaned against the doorway, eyes tracing me like he wanted to ask something he shouldn't. "You could sue him," he said. "You'd win easily." I told him I already had, just not for money. The door opened again. Elliot stepped in, no camera charm, no sharp suits, just exhaustion. "He's lost everything," he said quietly. "No," I told him, "he only lost the mask." Elliot dropped his gaze. "You were right about Davenport. The accounts line up. They're going to indict him. Maybe," I said, "for once the law will clean itself." Later that afternoon, a courier delivered an envelope sealed in red. Inside 4 plain lines from the Department of Justice, subject cleared of misconduct. Commendation granted retroactively. No apology, no ceremony, just accuracy finally. That was all I ever wanted. That night my phone buzzed. A message from an old number. "Your mother would have been proud. Dinner sometime." I stared at it for a long while. No anger, no forgiveness, just stillness. I saved it, didn't reply, and moved it to a folder named Archived. A lifetime can be defined by one word. He chose reputation. I chose record. A year later, life had gone quiet in the best way. No more courtrooms, no reporters, no whispers that turned names into headlines. Just a small office on the upper floor of a government building in Manhattan, where I worked as an advisor for a program training young investigators. The silence here wasn't empty, it was earned. The walls were bare except for one framed photo, my old Sentinel team faces, half hidden by desert dust and sun glare. None of them knew I had once been called a disgrace. I didn't see the point in telling them. Some truths live better unspoken. One rainy afternoon, I stepped into the hallway and caught a young trainee being scolded by her supervisor. "You're too rigid, too stubborn," he snapped. "That attitude will ruin your career." I waited until he walked off, then handed her a cup of coffee. "Stay that way," I said with a smile. Truth needs stubborn women. She blinked, then nodded, hesitant at first, but with that flicker of recognition I once had at her age. For a second, I saw the younger version of myself, still naive enough to believe that integrity alone could win. That evening, the city hummed softly beyond my apartment window. I turned on the light and opened the metal box one last time. Inside were only two things left worth keeping: the DOJ letter, clearing my name, and a photograph of my mother smiling in the garden. I closed the lid, locked it not to hide the past, but to seal it shut. Outside, the Manhattan skyline shimmered in silver streaks, quiet and steadfast, needing no audience. They once called me a disgrace. But when truth stood in uniform, the world went silent. I smiled not because I'd won, but because at last there was nothing left to prove.